Well, this, of course, is the first anniversary of the Hyatt Skywalk collapse. 114 people died when two skywalks came crashing down on a dance floor filled with people. It's the worst disaster in terms of lives lost in Kansas City history. And on the anniversary, Michael Mahoney reports on how the survivors are doing.
You never really forget. Time just heals a little. The shock, the horror, the fear that the victims of the Hyatt still feel a year later.
The thing that I see most is the noise and looking up and watching the fourth floor skywalk coming down, hitting the other one, and then the second one, and then the people falling off.
Mrs. Richardson was not hurt that night, but her story is part of this city's story and its feelings about the Hyatt disaster.
Well, it's a part of the community's history now. And as such, they have to own that. They have to own the continuing problems.
Memories can be a problem. For many of the victims and rescue workers, counseling has been one way to cope with what they saw at the Hyatt. Sessions that allow them to share their experience.
You talk things out, and then they would kind of make you realize, you know, it's better to get things out. And they really did help down there.
While many victims could talk to family and survivors about the Hyatt, a year later, many of them have now developed defenses against the inadvertent questions.
People really don't realize, I don't believe, you know, they don't realize that what they're bringing back, you know, but if you was there, it was just terrible, you know, you just don't want to bring it back in your mind.
This weekend, the first anniversary of the disaster, is bound to trigger some feelings among the victims and the rescue workers who were at the Hyatt that night. In fact, there has been some apprehension in town about what this weekend will mean. For some folks, today has been a very tough day.
I've been thinking about it a lot. It all has gone over again in my mind from a year ago, and it don't seem like a year has passed.
I think you can be assured that everyone will have some uneasiness who was there. To a varying degree.
I think that the anniversary probably is a milestone or a benchmark which, by virtue of just having the anniversary, reminds us that it is in the past, and that's where it belongs.
Michael Mahoney reporting the news.
1 year ago tonight, Kansas City's worst tragedy, the collapse of two skywalks at the Hyatt Regency Hotel. 114 people killed, 200 others injured. 35-year-old Mark Williams was the last person pulled alive from the rubble.
We were standing in line to get a drink, and I heard a popping noise and a tearing noise, kind of like metal being torn apart. And at that point, I knew, and I don't know how I knew, but I knew those skywalks were falling.
How many rescue workers do you have here right now, and what are your men doing?
We have at least 250 police officers, I'd guess an equal number of firemen, and about 200 medical, paramedics, doctors, and nurses who are treating the injured. I'd guess at least 600 people.
One giant slab of walkway buried 34 people. Only one among that group, Mark Williams, would survive.
Some man came by and tapped on the skywalk and said, "Is there anyone alive down there?" And I yelled up at him. And at that time, then he said, "My God, there's somebody alive under here."
2 hours later, after nearly 10 hours in darkness, Williams saw light and his rescuers.
I can remember feeling cool air and I could breathe again. It was hard to breathe under there.
He would spend 2 months in the hospital.
I wanted to amputate my left leg because there was so much crush and nerve damage done to it. Then they were talked out of doing that, and the leg started to recover slightly, and at that point they said I would be in a wheelchair the rest of my life, that I'd never walk. Then from that, when I finally got out of the wheelchair, a little bit, they said, "Well, you're never going to have any use of that leg. You'll be in a leg brace the rest of your life." Now I'm approaching probably 60 days away from getting rid of the leg brace on the left leg.
3 times a week, he works to strengthen his legs at a physical therapy clinic. As a real estate appraiser, his work requires a good deal of walking. Williams feels he's getting stronger. He tells me not a day goes by that he doesn't think about what happened a year ago tonight, but he doesn't dwell on it. I asked him if, because he was one of the lucky ones who came out alive that night, did he feel compelled to change his life in any way?
If I've had one person, I've had 50 people say that to me. You were saved. Obviously, you were saved for something very special. There's something out there you're supposed to do or you're destined to do in life, and that bothered me. I laid in the hospital for a month and a half, wondering when am I going to find out what it is I'm supposed to do, and am I ever going to find out what it is? And a priest, a Father Markleski, that was very close to me and an influence in my life at Rockhurst High School, came by and visited me one day in the hospital, and I asked him about this, and he said, well, Mark, I was supposed to be on an airline one time, and he said I was late and I couldn't get on the plane. They wouldn't let me on. The plane was taxiing down the runway, and it took off, and it crashed, and everyone was killed. And he said, people kept saying to me, obviously, there's something you're supposed to do, you were spared. And he said, I finally came to the conclusion that maybe I was doing one particular thing right, and that's why I was spared. So that took a lot of load off my mind. Maybe it's an easy way out, but maybe I'm doing one thing right that I'm supposed to continue to do.
What is Mark Williams doing tonight? He's with friends trying to keep him busy. But whatever his plans might be, Mark Williams knows this Saturday evening is different.